As the race for the White House heats up, we're likely going to see more of the candidates' spouses on the campaign trail. A new article in the Washington Post takes a look at what it calls the surreal lives of the husbands and wives of the men and women running for president. It looks at the dual role of being a, quote, uncomplaining source of support for your partner, making sure he or she is getting fed and sleeping and has someone to vent to, plus often being the mouthpiece for your partner and attending events he or she can't get to. Jada Yuan is the author of that piece. She's a feature reporter covering national politics for the Washington Post, and she joins me now from Washington. Jada, thanks very much for being with us. What are some of the roles that candidates' spouses play on the campaign trail?
It really varies depending on the spouse, and some will take a really active role, such as Jill Biden. She has her own events, she goes to fundraising, she's very crucial. She's almost like a second candidate or a second arm of Joe Biden, versus perhaps Elizabeth Warren's husband, Bruce Mann, who mainly takes care of the dog Bailey and takes Bailey to events.
I've seen Bailey on social media.
Bailey has a much larger social media presence than Bruce does. I couldn't even find Bruce having a Twitter handle.
Well, you also write, Jada, that a number of the spouses still have day jobs. So how do they balance that with spending time on the trail?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like they have as hard a role as some of these candidates who do have other jobs, such as the senators, where certainly Amy Klobuchar's husband, John Bessler, is a college professor, and I think he's a college professor at 2 different colleges. Mm-hmm. So he's going from Baltimore to Washington, also whenever Amy's in the Senate, and then also back on the campaign trail. He does a lot of stuff in Iowa for her. Wow.
Well, how critical, Jada, are spouses to a campaign's messaging and fundraising efforts?
I think they're the human arm. They're the people who can stand up and say, you know, Bernie Sanders has a family. This was like what it was like when he had his heart attack and how many people cared about him. Jane Sanders goes out and she talks about, you know, Thanksgiving with the family. Mm-hmm. They put a human spin on these candidates who are going at it over policy.
Right. It's a reminder that when we're talking about candidates, these candidates are people too, very much so.
They need to eat and sleep.
That's right. And they have those kind of human needs. So how do candidates' spouses and their families, though, navigate life on the campaign trail and in the public eye? Because as we know, I mean, it is a very glaring and often harsh spotlight.
And it's really hard for the spouses because they have a tightrope that they're walking. You don't want to get to know the spouse before you get to know the candidates. So they have to be a little bit in the background, but also doing all this work of fundraising and humanizing the candidate, and then doing their day jobs, and then trying not to say anything that will ruin the campaign, because it could happen. And especially when you see someone like Chasten Buttigieg, who has a huge Twitter following, mm-hmm. He's not being manned by the campaign at all, and he's putting out tweets constantly, which right now are a credit to the campaign.
Right. Well, one thing that I thought was so interesting in your piece is that there's this relationship that's sort of developed among the candidates' spouses. Tell us about that. It's almost like this informal support club that they've formed.
Yeah, well, they're spending a lot of time just sort of waiting in the wings for their spouse to give a speech. And, you know, it's some mess hall in Iowa or a community center. And, you know, you get to talking. They have a lot in common. They have a spouse who wants to be president of the United States. So, yeah, they exchange text messages. Chasten Buttigieg and Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, exchanged cell phone numbers pretty much right away. And they were the sort of inspiration for this article.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have read those interactions, something that probably most people don't think about, you know, who's supporting these candidates behind the scenes. Jada Yuan, thank you so much for joining us, Jada.
Thank you.